Okay, so this is what that's why you see these profiles here. This is standard. I've actually locked down the IP addresses. Then I press submit. Now what happens when that presses submit is CloudForms is using its internal Ansible engine and then running the playbook for it. So you can see all the steps in our playbook, everything from actual provisioning to registering to a satellite to things like doing the logging, doing the configuring with Red Hat Insights. This is all part of our playbook. So you can see setting up the repos, all this stuff is doing. Here's the actual XCAP remediation playbook to lock it down as a post-provisioning step to that SCAP profile that the user picked. In this case, it's a standard one. So here's our virtual machine. And then when I look inside that virtual machine, I can see, what did I name it? I named it this. There's my IP address. Now I'm going to enforce compliance with security policies in an automated fashion. What do I mean that specifically? I'm going to log in as a restricted user. That's lab user, which the admin has created. Now, as this restricted user cannot do anything to modify the systems except his own. He has an OpenStack system. Now, I'm going to look inside this OpenStack system, and I'm going to see it's non-compliant. Why? Now, you're giving the user to have control over his or her own instances. Why is it not compliant? I'm going to dig a little further. It's not compliant because it's vulnerable to Meltdown and Spectre. So that's why it's non-compliant. So now I'm going to go back into that system. It's an OpenStack. Again, it's an OpenStack instance. I'm going to look inside the packages. I told you agentless. CloudForms knows all this information about your systems without using any agents, and even though the system is off. I can tell you every single package, versions, release numbers that are installed on that machine. With that information, I can easily tell this is kernel version 693. That's an older version of the kernel. That's vulnerable to Meltdown and Spectre. When I see that, I can immediately create a control policy and make it so that it's, to tell me that it's vulnerable. I've already installed the latest kernel. I'm going to do a rescan of it because now the latest kernel's on there. And I'm going to do a rescan to see that now it's compliant because I've updated the kernel. Right? So now it's compliant. If you want to see further why it's compliant, you just do what you did earlier. You go and you just look and it says, now, yes, you are compliant because you've updated the kernel. It's now not a 693 kernel. Now that I have that, I can actually create a report. I also told you that one of the things CloudForms does is it actually can create reports. So here's a report of every single system that's vulnerable, a VM vulnerable. You can see there's one VM that's vulnerable. That's a Rev VM, and another one that's OpenStack. Now, I can see inside the file system, as I said earlier, that earlier you also saw which hosts are vulnerable. Here's SSHD config. I can see inside SSHD config, password, here's the password authentication, yes. I'm seeing this without SSHing in. Now, I'm logged in as the security auditor here, right? So this is what I mean by you can give restricted access to people without giving them the ability to be root or to SSH it to machines. This is a security user who logs in. He has the ability to see reports. Maybe you want them to see reports of systems because then they don't have to bug you about getting information about your environment, right? They can also maybe you want them to look at inside config files. Maybe that might be a good thing you want to give them access to without SSH. All they can do is come in here and look at it, right? So this is what I mean by you give restricted access to certain users. A good example would be the security officer. So I'm going to look inside SSHD config, and I see all this information about it. Now I'm going to create a control policy in OpenStack. There's a control policy that I've created that says, hey, when an OpenStack instance power is on, I want you to attach this particular security group. It's called a production security group. Whenever an instance turns on, maybe I want every turned on instance to be on this particular production security group or certain security group. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. So I'm going to go into that particular OpenStack instance. So you can see I'm going into this lab. It's called Lab 3 VM3 OpenStack instance. I'm going to power it on. The minute I do that, it triggers that control policy that you saw earlier. So when that turns on, what's going to happen is it's going to put this into the production. It's going to add the production security group for this OpenStack instance without me doing anything. I literally just turned it on. So this is where you've now automated that whole thing. So you can see now the production security groups attached to this VM simply by turning it on because I have that control policy in place. So this is kind of like what I mean by automating all of this easily. So this is OpenStack, OpenShift now. Now I have a control policy that says there's three control policies in place. And this is added to my entire OpenShift environment. So things like, for example, I want to do things like every incoming image, I want it to be scanned. Whenever you see a high vulnerable security image, a container image, I want you to prevent it from running in OpenShift again. So this is a way where you have CloudForms managing the security of OpenShift's container instances. So now, whenever a new image is scanned, discovered, for example, container image discovered, it initiates a scan on it. So that's what this control policy does. And then I want to initiate the actual analysis of the container image. And then I also want to schedule the, once the analysis is complete, I want to check the host or VM for compliance. So this control policy is on OpenShift provider, which means that every single container image inside OpenShift gets this policy applied to them without them even realizing that this policy in place. I, as admin, put this policy in place. So if I go into the OpenShift provider, then I can see, hey, what policies are on this provider? Here's all the different ones. You can just put a check mark next to the one you want. So you can see the OpenSCAP profiles here. So that means that all container images inside OpenShift get this policy applied. So whenever there is a new image, it's going to get scanned. Whenever there's a severely high vulnerable image, it's going to get tagged by CloudForms and annotated in OpenShift so that it can never be run again inside OpenShift. So this is a way where literally by the click of GUI in the GUI, you've now prevented high severity vulnerabilities from ever running inside your container environment. So when I go inside the OpenShift environment to look inside it, so I can see here, I can see all of the nodes, the container images. So I'm going to go dig into the container image a little further. And then from there, I can see here's my OpenSCAP scan results. So I can see that here's all the 6 scanner results. And then just like you saw earlier with the reports, when I click on that, what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to see, OK, here's my green light, red light, pass, fail. And then I'm going to be able to see all of the scan results for that particular container image. So you can see here's all the different rules, and then here are all my severity high. So now you can suspect that for this particular container image, that if I try to launch a container with that image, you would suspect that OpenShift is going to prevent me from doing that because of the fact that this control policy is in place for every container image for OpenShift. So I'm going to try and do that right here. So you can see here I'm trying to launch a container with that particular image. And so when I try to do that, however, I'm going to add it to the project. This is that. I'm going to try to add that vulnerable image to that container. I'm going to try to launch it, I mean. And so when I go there, I'm going to say I'm going to deploy this image. I'm going to put that vulnerable container image name into here so I can deploy that image. And then when I say I'm going to try to deploy it with the known high severity vulnerabilities, and then the minute I try to do that, it's going to so it's asking you information like, okay, what's the name, et cetera. And then when you try to say, okay, let's go create it based on that image, what happens is OpenShift is going to immediately come back and say, sorry, you can't launch this because there's severity high vulnerabilities in it. So this is how CloudForms is acting as that manager for the OpenShift infrastructure and managing making sure that the container images do not have any severity high vulnerabilities in it. So you can see here there's an error creating pod, and then that deployment failed. I can create reports also. Hey, show me all the non-compliant containers. Show me the name, the state. Show me whether it was compliant or not. Now I'm going to automate the ongoing remediations and security. So I'm in a virtual machine. I'm going to do an OpenSCAP scan. When I do this, it's talking to the OpenSCAP tool inside Satellite. And I'm going to use that to scan my system on a per button kind of automated basis without going into Satellite. That way I can scan here's all my profiles I have in Satellite. I'm going to use I created a custom one from SCAP Workbench that does one thing and one thing only. It checks to see if the aid package is installed. So I'm going to go and press create. Here it's running through that playbook, which, like I said, it's just going to talk to Satellite, and it's going to run the OpenSCAP scan against that custom profile, which in this case is scanning against that custom profile, which just checks to see if the aid package is installed. That's it. So I'm going to go and look in the virtual machine now that this has passed, that the scan has successfully run. And then what I'll notice right away is that we set up in the workflow is that when the scan passes or fails, you want to tag it accordingly. You can see here that it's non-compliant because the scan has failed. I want to keep I want to track which ones are failing certain scans and what, because then I can do a report. I can say, show me every single VM and show me the scan results. This one here is non-compliant to the RHEL 7 custom. This one is compliant, and this one is also compliant. I can create these reports. I can create them as a security auditor. You can have the security guy create these reports. You want to know if it's compliant, you run the report. Don't bother me, right? And then I can also, but as the remediate, you don't want to do that, right? When they tell you there's an issue, you as the admin want to remediate because you need root access for that. So here I'm going to remediate the RHEL 7 custom. What that's going to do is, again, going to talk to satellite. I'm going to wait to see aid is installed. It's installed here now because literally at the push of that button, that the playbook got installed. That playbook got launched to install aid. So now here I'm going to redo the scan, and then when I redo the scan, it's going to again launch that scan playbook, and then when I redo the scan, you're going to redo the scan for that playbook that you just ran, right? And then because I put aid in the package, you're going to see that, okay, now when I scan it, it's going to pass, and now I can redo my report. And now when I redo my report, I can come in and I can see now everything has passed the RHEL 7 custom. And then I can see other profiles, like I said, other reports, as I said, such as like non-compliant containers. Now let's move to insights. Insights, you can say, okay, insights, I'm going to see this system here, this host, all the security issues with that host. For example, there's a payload injection issue. There's an A there, meaning that you can get an Ansible playbook from that issue. It tells you the detected issues. It tells you how to fix it, all in English. But you also can create Ansible playbooks from that, for those issues as well. So that's what I'm doing next. So you can see what we're doing next is I'm going to actually go ahead and I'm going to create a plan. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to create a plan to fix this particular vulnerability, the payload injection issue, right? So I'm going to say, okay, here's the name of my plan. It's called payload remediation. Here's the specific system. The system's called IC4. Now, what do I want that playbook to have? I want it to fix I don't want it to fix everything right now. I just wanted to fix this one thing. I just wanted to fix the kernel vulnerable to man-in-the-middle payload injection. When I do this, it's going to create that playbook to fix that one issue. So, but that's just the choice I made. I could have made the playbook fix everything, right? And I am going to do that later. But right now, I'm just doing this. I also have a choice. Okay, do you want to do this fix or this fix? Because this one has a reboot required. This one doesn't. Insights gives you these kinds of choices. And you can say, okay, I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to go to Ansible Tower, and I'm going to launch this playbook against my systems, right? In Ansible has Tower integrated with Insights, which means from Ansible you can actually see these security issues that we saw earlier from Insights as well, directly from Ansible Tower. And then here's that payload injection. You can see that here's my remediation plan that I created earlier, right? And then, so from here, now that you have the plan in place, then what you can do now is you can create the template, right, job template. Ansible Tower has job templates that you create to run your playbook. So here's my, my payload fix job template. I pressed the little rocket to actually run the playbook. So when I press that rocket, okay, from my given playbook that Insights gave me, I'm now running and fixing those issues, that payload injection issue, on that system, on IC4. You can see that that has run, and now it's successful, and now those actions that we saw earlier, it went down a little bit because we just fixed that issue. Now I'm going to create the planner for fixing every single issue that Insights has pointed out for me for IC4. And then when I do that, then I can actually say, okay, this is my plan for fixing all. And then here I'm going to make sure that I pick if I want to do reboot, which one of these would I actually like to do as my resolution. Then here's my fix all template. Just like before, I'm going to run it by just pressing that rocket button. And then instead of fixing just one issue, it's actually going to fix all those issues that you checked against all of your systems that you have in your inventory, in the insights inventory. So now you can see a lot of issues went down because of the fact that, that you've done this across for fixes, many fixes, not just one or two type of fixes.